Hey all, and welcome to our next project. We're going to be making some neon signs. I mean, they might not actually be fully neon signs, but they're going to look like it. They will fool your viewer. They're going to look really cool. So I'm excited to introduce this next project to you. So first, I think before we really get started with diving into like the creation part, we always want to do some understanding behind it, and of course some brainstorming too, right? So that's what we're going to get started with here today. So let's learn about neon signs. All right, so first thing we should know about neon signs is that their inventor was Georges Claude. Okay, now you might be hearing that name and thinking, that's not a name I'm super familiar with. It looks like it's Georges Claude, right? Well, he's French, okay, so that's why we have that French accent along with it. So he's a French engineer, a chemist, an inventor, and so he was the first person to apply electrical discharge to a sealed tube of neon gas to create a lamp. I mean, so obviously this guy is quite brilliant because this had never been possible before, and he's coming up with these like, okay, if we do this and this, just wait till you hear more about what he's done. It's pretty amazing. So Georges Claude displayed the first neon lamp to the public on December 11th, 1910. So this is over 100 years ago he's inventing this, which is pretty cool. So anyway, and I wanted to just realize too, like, you know how I feel like, especially, you know, in today's age, we're so used to things happening quickly, right? But I want you to notice this, that he first did this in 1902, and it wasn't until 1910 that the first one was displayed to the public. So 8 years of like really fine-tuning and making sure that this worked properly and was safe and in a way that was practical. So, you know, it takes time for these things to happen. I think sometimes when we look at these inventions, we just think like, oh, they just came up with it and it just happened overnight. And that's really not the case. So in this case, really when it comes to neon lights, like, yes, they're artistic, aren't they? Like, they're really, I mean, there's some really cool ones. But it's also chemistry. This is one of my favorite things about art, is that art really does, it's a application for all the things we learn in our other classes, right? Like, you can use words, and you can use you know, science, and you can use history, and all of that can be applied into your artwork, and so many other things, right? Like, that's just tip of the iceberg right there. But art is really a great way for us to be able to apply what we learn in those other classes into something meaningful and useful to the world. Anyway, we are going to take a moment here to see how neon signs are made. So here we go. And now you see me in just a moment here. I want to make sure you guys can see the whole video. So now you don't.
See the light.
So I decided to get a Christmas present for Dan and Lincoln. I'm a little bit late, but I think they'll forgive me when they see what we've made. I talked these guys into letting me film a little bit about how neon signs are made, and I think you'll enjoy the process. Let's get started. So neon signs are all over the place, lighting up cities, lighting up exit signs, lighting up open signs. It's hard to walk around without seeing a neon sign. They've been around for about 100 years. Started over in Paris at the Paris Auto Show in about 1910. Neon is a rare gas present in the air all around us, and is separated from the air around us by liquefaction and then pulling it out of that liquid. Kind of like how the king of random was getting liquid nitrogen out of the air in his basement, if you remember that video I made. But before we get into the gas part of the signs, let's talk about the glass tubing. Now, the glass tubing comes in all different shapes, sizes, and colors. The inside of the tube is coated with a powder. The powder can be any color. We got red, we got blue, yellow, orange. But the coloring of the tube doesn't necessarily signify what color the lamp is going to be when the gas is actually inside. It's an interesting process with a lot of chemistry, and it's an art form. So to make this sign for what's inside, we started off with a singular piece of glass tube. And glass, when warmed up, gets soft and malleable. You can see it kind of drooping down here in the video, and we take that piece of glass tube, set it on a piece of paper, and line it up in the finished shape. We only have a couple seconds to do this because as the glass cools down, it hardens and will be in that shape permanently. Now obviously this was the easiest bend and probably the only one I could master since I'm not an expert at creating neon signs. To make the tighter bends, we have to go to something called a crossfire with a lot more, flame in the middle. And we fold the glass tubing in something called a double back, which makes the tighter corners for the inner letters of the what's inside sign. Once the glass tubing is bent, 2 electrodes are placed in either side, which kind of completes a circuit. Electricity needs to bounce around inside of the tubing in order to ignite or light the gas that's inside of it. We take it over to the manifold, which successfully pulls all of the regular air out of the glass tubing and inserts argon, one of the gases that exist in the air around us, but in very small amounts. One cool thing with the electrodes on either side of the glass tubing is that they needed to be heated up in order to get rid of any impurities or imperfections on the metal itself, so the inside of the contraption can burn cleanly. Remember, throughout this process, we're being very careful not to damage anything because glass is glass and glass can break. After the glass is warmed up and the burn-in is complete, we can inject a very small amount of argon into the vacuum that we created inside of the tubing. Remember this small ball of mercury. We're going to come back to this later. You can see that the natural burning color of the argon is kind of like a pinkish color almost. It's a smooth red. Obviously this parenthesis from the what's inside sign is still connected to the vacuum system. So we'll take the hand torch and put it all around the small glass tubing, and because of the vacuum inside, it naturally wants to pinch itself shut as it warms up, successfully keeping the argon inside of the glass tubing and allowing us to remove it from the vacuum machine, the manifold. We'll let it burn for a minute to make sure the tube's good and there's no small leaks, make sure everything's functional. Then we'll turn it off, let it cool down for a second, and we'll take the small ball of mercury in that little glass bubble and slowly tip it into the tube itself. The reaction between the silver mercury and the kind of pinkish argon is what turns the tube lighting white. And you can see the color change as the mercury drop drips into the entire tube. We have the electrode on one end burning the bluish white and the electrode on the other end burning pink because the mercury hasn't gotten there yet. Once the mercury has touched both sides and everything is burning clean and white, we can tip it off and remove that last little niblet of glass from the parenthesis. Then we can cover both ends in a small piece of rubber and mount it to the back plate of where it's going to live permanently. There's something called a transformer on the back of the backplate that allows electricity to flow through each of the connections inside each letter. Each letter has 2 electrodes completing a circuit inside of each of the glass formations. One interesting fact is it has little glass pieces to separate it from the backplate. Right now the What's Inside logo is mounted on plastic, but if it was mounted on metal it would need like an insulator between the electrified glass and the metal plate. So these plastic standoffs with the copper wiring keeping everything in place is what gives it that insulation. The cool thing with all of these colors is that depending on the powder coating on the outside of the tube and the electricity flowing through it, depends on what color we get and how bright it is. You can see we have a 6500 white right here and a 4500 color temperature white over here. Basically anything is possible. And finally, when everything is complete, we have a finished What's Inside logo right here, and I think it turned out pretty sweet. And I hope Dan and Lincoln aren't too mad at me for missing Christmas and giving it to them a little bit late. I've learned that creating neon signs is not just chemistry, but it's like an art form. There's so many variables that go into the shaping of the glass, as well as the gas and the mercury and the different elements that go into coloring, the electricity even. I've learned a lot today. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments and I'll try to answer them. I'm pretty excited with the way it turned out. Thanks for coming along with us. Huge thanks to the Rainbow Neon Sign Company here in Salt Lake City for helping me out with this sign. They've been around since 1945, making neon signs for quite a while. They know a lot more than I do about this stuff. I'll put a link for their website down in the video description if you have any questions for them. I hope What's Inside likes their neon sign. Thanks, Tom.
All right, so pretty cool, right? Now, obviously you can see why we're not making actual neon signs in class because, well, I'm doubting most of us have all those supplies at home. So we're going to be making a little bit safer version of that, but it's going to look equally as cool. So we're going to have some fun with this project. If you want to learn even more information about Georges Claude, who is the inventor, go ahead and also watch this video in our slides. It's a little over 2 minutes long, but that'll give you a little bit more information on his background and how he came up with it as well, which is pretty neat to find out. Anyway, our next goal is going to be to include some brainstorming ideas into our day today. So let's start thinking about like what kind of stuff might we want to create. What are you into? What are your hobbies? What defines you as a person? Or if this is going to be a gift for somebody else, like think about what they like and what they enjoy. So you can see here some examples from students in the past and things that they've come up with. You'll notice too that many of them do include lettering with it, right? We don't just necessarily have to have a picture. Having some lettering on in there, some kind of a phrase to go along with it, works really well for these neon signs as well. Otherwise, they do tend to be a little bit, we're gonna go with blasé, and no neon sign wants to be blasé, right? We want to keep them fun and interesting. So think about too then as you're creating like an idea in your head of what the picture might be of what kind of phrase could go along with it. Like, do you